Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. My name is Mannat. I'm a sophomore, and my friends Shrish and Julian, we started Product Pathways together last quarter, actually, as a way of getting leaders in product to come speak with us so we can learn more about their careers and trajectories. And with that, I'm super excited to be here today with Miss Anneka Gupta. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us. She's the CPO of Rubrik. And she's also a Stanford alum, so I'm curious to see how her experience compares to ours. But yeah, before we dive into the product stuff, I'd love to learn a little bit about where you grew up, what Stanford was like, and how you got interested in the tech space in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in the Bay Area. I keep feeling like at some point in my life I'm going to move somewhere else, but that hasn't happened yet. So my parents are from India. They immigrated. They both immigrated here. They were engineers. They did different grad school degrees. Moved to the Bay Area, worked in technology in that point in time. Obviously, a very different world than our world today. They both started companies and ran companies for many years, and that was my life growing up. And so I was always indoctrinated from the beginning into tech, into engineering, everything like that. So I feel like it was kind of in my blood to get into the space. And then in high school, I was just super interested in math, science. I think probably my junior or senior year of high school, I took computer science for the first time, and I really loved it. And then when I came to Stanford, I didn't do computer science. I did MCS, which I just learned is now renamed the data science major. But when I started at Stanford, I thought I was going to major in physics because I really enjoyed physics in high school. And then realized that was way too theoretical for me. So after freshman year, I was like, okay, let me reassess. And I went through all of the majors, and I was like, which one sounds the most interesting? And I always had a multitude of different interests. And so that's how I ended up doing MCS.
That's crazy. I feel like Physics 41 traumatized me last winter, and I don't think I'm gonna step near physics again.
Yeah, I got traumatized by my classes as well.
And I'd love to learn more about Rubrik. So can you tell us a little bit more about the company and what you do as CPO?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rubrik is a super interesting company. I started there about 3 years ago. So if you maybe I'll explain the customer problem that we solve. So it started as a modern backup and recovery company, which doesn't sound super sexy, but it's pretty interesting because essentially companies have a ton of data. They have data that sits in their data centers. They have data in the cloud. They have data sitting in various kinds of SaaS applications. And if something happens to that data and you can't recover that data, then you potentially have your business is going to have downtime, or someone's not going to be able to do their job. Now, this can happen for a variety of different reasons, right? You're on Google Drive. You accidentally delete a folder, and it sits in your trash can for 30 days. But what if you accidentally deleted it and 3 months go by? How are you going to get it back? But then there are more dire situations, which is what has happened more commonly now, which is ransomware attacks, where cyber attackers are going after the data. They're taking the data out of the organization, or they're destroying the data, or they're encrypting the data to basically take an entire business down. And so Rubrik's business has really been in helping people recover their data in whatever their situation is. Because of the rise of cyber attacks, we found ourselves in a place where we're not just a modern backup and recovery company now, we're actually a data security company. And so I joined 3 years ago as part of the journey of really shifting our products and shifting our strategy from being just people thinking of us as modern backup and recovery to truly thinking about data security and trying to figure out what are the myriad of security issues that companies are facing regarding their data, and what does that mean in terms of the kinds of products we should build to help them make sure that their data is always available to them when they need it, and that their data isn't being put at risk in a variety of different ways. So, the big things that I do in my day-to-day is in my big job is to actually really manage this whole strategy, figure out what it is that we should be doing, where are we going, obviously taking into account lots of different stakeholders, internal stakeholders, our CEO, our CTO, but customers, what we're seeing in the market, and trying to figure out what does that mean in terms of where we're going, and then really figuring out how do we execute against that? Like there's a lot of different requirements coming in all the time. We have 6,000 existing customers. They have things that they need. We still, like, a lot of people buy us for backup and recovery. So even if we have these like big picture visions of doing a lot more in security, we have to balance that with the investments that we're making in our core products. So it's really interesting and exciting because there's always a ton of stuff to do. And my team now consists of all of product management as well as design. So that includes like the product designers, UX research, and design systems, which really comes up with like the components that can then be used across the product.
Super interesting. And I was watching one of your interviews, and you shared that like you're not an expert necessarily in any of these things, but it takes like a lot of curiosity to actually be able to like learn all the different components. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about that, and how do you sort of figure it out as you go?
Yeah, it was interesting because before Rubrik, so I've been with Rubrik almost 3 years. Before Rubrik, I was at my previous company for 11 years, which was crazy. Never expected to be there that long. But it was in a totally different space. It was in marketing technology. We were selling to marketers. We were not selling to CIOs or IT people or security people, which is very, very different. We were like probably like 5 layers higher in the stack than in the tech stack than Rubrik is.
Are the CIOs a tougher crowd to sell to?
They're a different crowd to sell to. Like in some ways they're easier because it's like I get it more. Like they're technical. They're more logical. They're like, hey, like does this product do what I need it to do? CMOs like there's a little more like fluffiness in it. So not that that's a bad thing, but it's like the decision making isn't quite the same, and I wouldn't say it's like quite as rigorous in all ways. So it's like, so coming into this space and coming into Rubrik, I really had to learn a ton about the technology, about how people set up their IT infrastructure in large legacy businesses as well as like newer companies. I had to learn, I knew some of this stuff because I did engineering. I knew some of the stuff because like obviously we touch infrastructure every day in just like our day-to-day jobs, but like really understanding the intricacies, really understanding the complexities. And for me, like I think like the way I started learning was just like, I'm the type of learner, I can't just read a bunch of stuff and absorb it. I can read things, but I learned from talking to people. So when I entered the organization, I just had tons of conversations with technical sales teams, with product managers, with engineers, and all like slowly I was able to, as I like just went down and kept asking questions until I understood stuff, the pieces started to come together, and I began to understand like much more deeply what, how the business operates, how our products operate, how our customers operate. And that has like helped me form the picture of then really understanding how we make trade-offs to make the right investments for the business.
Interesting. Seems like there's a lot to balance then.
Yes.
So what does your day-to-day look like with all of that on your plate?
It varies quite a bit. So sometimes I'm traveling to go see a customer. Like yesterday, I was in Tucson, Arizona to go see the Army, and the IT department of the Army, which is just kind of crazy. It's on a base hour and a half outside of Tucson. So that was like what I spent my entire day doing yesterday. Some days, like, I'm deeply in meetings with engineering where we're trying to really work out, hey, what are the details of like this thing that we're going to build? What are all the different components we have to think of, the trade-offs we need to talk about? And we're doing sessions like that. Sometimes I'm like working with other product managers. My team is about 70 people. So a lot of it, like what I do is people management as well. And we're like in the middle of our promotion and talent rating cycle. So that's like taking up a bunch of time. Sometimes I'm meeting with sales, helping them with a customer they're trying to sell to, and they just need help because maybe that customer has some blockers from the product doesn't work exactly the way they want it to. Or I'm working with like support because there's someone that's angry and they want someone to talk to and yell at and figure out how what we're going to do about their problems. So it really varies quite a bit. I essentially work with every function across the company. So I work with finance, I work with engineering, I work with sales, I work with marketing, I work with obviously like other PMs on my team, but basically every function at the company I interact with in some way, shape, or form because it all has to come together in order for us to like make our product successful with our customers, which is at the end of the day what I feel like my job is day to day.
That's a lot of hats to wear.
Yes.
Oh my God.
But I love it. It's so fun because you get to just see how things come together and be part of solving really complex problems.
I can barely handle like my 4 classes and like a little bit of stuff on the side. That's crazy. I'm curious, like you described working with a lot of different teams and orgs. I don't know that like a product person necessarily has like direct authority or influence there. So how do you lead by influence and sort of compel them to like buy into your vision or like build that vision together even?
Well, I think the most important thing is getting everyone on the same page about what we're trying to accomplish. If you hopefully you work in companies when you graduate where there's not a lot of politics, where people aren't out there like just trying to do stuff to like better their own status within the company, but they're truly trying to do stuff for the betterment of the entire company and where we're going. So, in general, it's like people want to help each other. It's like you're not going to get a lot of resistance. It's like if you're coming in trying to help someone, or you're trying to come in and problem solve together, people want to lean in there. So, my approach has just always been like, be curious about the people, like really build relationships, so that you're not coming to them with a problem and that's the first time that you've ever had an interaction with them. And then like anytime we're working together on a problem, be just super clear and crisp on what are we trying to solve for? Like what are the things that are standing in the way of us solving this problem, and work through it together. And that's how I like to approach it, and it makes these relationships work really, really well. And I don't have all the answers. That person probably doesn't have all the answers together, but we can work through it if we kind of share what we know and we're really structured in the way that we're approaching the problem. And like I think what I'm good at is like actually providing that structure, so that way we're not just having a ton of like you have 5 people in a room and like people are bringing up stuff, but it's not coming together into a plan or strategy or taking a step forward.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like how do you actually conceptualize that vision and like actually make it practical? Because I feel like if someone were to tell me like, oh, we have to build a product, I would have like a million different ideas of what we could do. So how do you prioritize and like think about strategy and all of that?
I think when it comes down to a specific product, and I'll give an example right now of a new product that we're working on. Like many companies, we're working on like an AI specific product and not just like a chat on top of our UI, but truly thinking about how we can help organizations unlock the power of AI, given that we have access to a lot of their data. So we're building a product around that, and like I don't have a product manager to focus on this, so I'm personally focusing on it right now. And it's really nebulous. It's like we could go in tons of directions. This field is obviously developing really quickly. How companies are thinking about leveraging AI is developing really quickly. There's a lot of variance in that because like you have companies like large insurance companies, and we have companies that are tech companies, and we have companies everywhere in between. So how they're thinking about these problems is quite diverse as well. And so it kind of starts out, and I am a big believer that like in the beginning you have to let things be a little messy. Trying to put it in structure too early basically kills the creativity. So in the beginning we would get in a room, like me, our CEO, some of our founding engineers, some folks from our technical sales team, and we would just start talking about ideas and be like, hey, this is what we're thinking, like this is what we're learning, and we would just share stuff, and it wouldn't be a very structured conversation at all. We would just kind of be talking together, and then slowly we started to kind of converge on, oh, these are interesting opportunities for us. We started having a lot of conversations, which I think is a great way to kind of synthesize where you want to go. So we started talking to VCs. We started talking to people that worked at other AI companies. We started talking to our customers, and we were just like, what are you doing in generative AI today? What is standing in the way of you adopting this technology more? What are the kinds of use cases? Who are the people in your organization that are driving this? So we could start to build context and understand what was happening. And kind of through those conversations, we started to converge on, okay, there's a path here. There's some product that we can build. Mm-hmm. And now, like once we just started to get the shape of that, we just started building stuff. And we started, and the prioritization, and then we identified kind of 2 internal teams who were going to actually pilot the product for us with their internal use cases. And we've talked to a couple of external customers that we think we can work with them on their use cases. And then we're going to build the product together collaboratively for these different use cases and figure out what ends up, we might have to throw some code away. We might build some stuff that doesn't actually make sense for everyone, but only makes sense for these 2 or 3 different use cases. But in getting something out there, we can then give give people something to respond to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the best way to build products, because a lot of mistakes that I think people make in product and engineering is you build this big vision, but you never get anyone to respond to it. And then you find out that you've built this when actually like what people need is this. And instead it's like, start somewhere, and then you can like, you might have to throw stuff away, you might have to change directions, but if you start something with something small and give something out for people to respond to, you can learn really quickly and like build towards like what is actually going to be a product that people are going to want and need and use.
Interesting. So on a product side, like what does that feedback look like? Are you talking to customers? Are you like talking to engineers? How do you actually decide like this is something that will land versus like we need to change course here?
Yeah, I mean, it's all like we talk to everyone. I think the hard part is that it's not, especially if you're coming from a more technical background, it's not black and white, and it's not like you can just look at data, especially in B2B product management. I think in B2C, there's a lot more data you can look at, but a lot of time it's not looking at the data and saying, well, what does the data tell me? Or, 5 customers said this and 3 customers said this, so I'm going to do the thing that the 5 customers told me to do. It's a lot more like kind of building an intuitive sense of what's important, and recognizing that, that may mean that like the way I like to think about it is like you're getting all these signals, you're coming up with a hypothesis or a story of like what you think is most important. You go test that story with like another set of people. You refine that over time. You build stuff, and then you kind of get the real feedback at the end of the day after you build it. And so it's like it's very much an art, I think, of just figuring out what signals do you think are most important. And there is data in there, right? You want to build stuff like if you're building enterprise business, you may want to build stuff that like your largest customers are asking you for, but there's like a fine line between saying, okay, this is our largest customer, we're going to do everything that they ask for, even if we don't think anyone else, or we haven't heard this from anyone else, versus saying, these are the things that we're going to do because we think that they're actually applicable to everyone else too. So you have to kind of draw those lines somewhere. And again, you don't always make the right decision. Sometimes you end up building something that really only gets used by one customer. But it's better to make a decision and move than to like try to get the perfect information and make sure that everything that you build is actually the right thing.
And I'm assuming that also requires like a lot of pivots and changing course?
Yeah, but I would say like the pivots are small. Like I almost like, hey, if we need to shift like 10, 20% in one direction or another, that's fine. If you're finding yourself like constantly going in this direction and then pivoting all the way over here, and then you end up over here, then you pivot over here, then it's like something is wrong with the way that you are testing hypotheses in the market and making decisions. Because that will happen sometimes. And when you're first starting a company, for instance, that should happen. But once you're like, we have 6,000 customers, we have hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, we have people that we can go talk to. We have an established product. Like we shouldn't be doing, we might make some bets and like try some things that are way out here, like some of the stuff we're doing in generative AI, but it's done with thought. And like, even then, like, I don't think we're going to end up wildly swinging over here. I think again, it's going to be like maybe instead of a 10 to 20% shift, maybe it's a 30% shift, but it's not going to be something where it's like, we're totally having to change directions. Because we have enough information to like make more informed decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of what you mentioned is like it's different when you're doing it for B2B versus like a consumer company. And our first speaker, Sabrina Alice, she was the CPO of Pinterest. She was telling us a lot about what it's like to work for a consumer company and manage product for them, and like how much of her work is actually just like talking to users and like getting their feedback, seeing what's trending, like what the vibes are.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's different as a SaaS company?
Well, I've never worked at a consumer company, and I have to believe like what Sabrina was saying is true, which is even in consumer, you need to understand what people are thinking. You need to understand your user. You need to be able to empathize with them. You need to understand the larger context of their life and how your product fits into it. Because otherwise you can look at data all day and it's not going to mean anything. And you're not going to know which data is actually most important to look at. So in that way, I think it's the same. I think the nice thing with like B2B enterprise is like you're not, unless you're working for a company that basically works with super, super small companies, you have people that you can go out and talk to. You have people that have invested money, but more important than money, they've invested time in implementing your product and bringing it into their organization. And so they're typically invested in your success, which is a great situation to be in because it's not like a whim. Like you don't buy B2B SaaS products or enterprise IT products on a whim. You buy them because you're trying to solve a real problem. And so with that investment, it's like you actually have a captive audience of people who are willing to give you feedback and engage with you. And because it's like, there's no, with Pinterest, you have like freemium, which is like, right, a lot of people are free and some people are I guess everyone's free because it's all ad supported. Maybe they have a subscription business. But like for us, like everyone is paying for our product. And so when you want to test something, you could very easily go and be like, is this person going to be willing to pay more? If not, otherwise, when you have something that's free, it's like, well, people aren't that invested in it. It's not clear. It's like if they're going to give you feedback that's actually relevant, because again, if like people are willing to buy it and put time into implementing your product, that definitely means that you're adding value. So there's like better, I think, just value signals you get and higher quality signals that you can get from customer conversations because they're just so invested in making this successful.
Interesting. I like the analogy of a captive audience.
Yeah.
Like if you're investing millions of dollars in something, you best want it to work.
Yeah, and it's like, and really like it's less about the money and is more about their time, because implementing these products takes a lot of time. It usually requires, if you're selling into a large organization, many stakeholders. So they're like these people that are our customers, they have spent hours getting like their bosses to agree to buy this product. They've spent hours trying to make sure that every stakeholder's requirements are incorporated in the purchasing process. They've done all of that work to implement our product or to buy our product and then implement it. And that's like, that is way more to them. Like they don't care, like at the end of the day, it's like not their money. It's like, it's the money of the company. I mean, some people feel it that way, but if you're in a really large company, like a large insurance company or something like that, you don't care really. I mean, you just have your budget and you're trying to deploy your budget. But for them, it's like personal because it is the time that they have spent in their job, and they may get promoted because this project went really well, or they may get fired if this project goes really badly. Like that is the reality, and that's what they care about more.
Crazy.
Yeah, the stakes are a lot different.
Super interesting. And another thing that you mentioned in some of your interviews was the importance of like personal feedback and like the role that played in your own leadership growth. So I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So everyone I manage on my team, I think every single maybe one person of all my direct reports is younger than me, but everyone else is older than me. So like I've been really, really lucky. Like I've had a very meteoric rise in my career at my previous company because the company like really took off, and the company invested in me. And then, at Rubrik too, I'm like the youngest person on the executive team by almost 10 years. So it's a lot. Yeah, it's crazy. Wow. So it is. But that has meant that like in order for me to get to where I am, I've had to learn very, very quickly what's working and what's not in terms of the way I show up and in terms of the way I lead and how I operate every day. And so for me, like I think the biggest factor, like the reason why I've been able to scale quickly into these roles that I've been given is because I've learned, it did not start this way, but I've learned to be like very receptive and curious about the feedback that people are giving me so that I can truly figure out how I can improve and do the job better. And it's really hard to do that because like it's hard to hear the things that you're not doing well or the things that people expect of you that you're not doing, especially when you're a high achiever. It's hard to sometimes like take a step back and ask more questions and not just assume you understand what they're talking about. It's hard to like not be defensive and to truly like think about like, hey, how do I completely change what I'm doing or completely change how I show up to be something different than what I've been doing before. And it's a constant process. Like there's always things to work on, and there's always things that like, I try to look for and try to understand of like, how am I showing up so that I can figure out what are those things to work on so I can get better. And the reality is the more senior you get, the less feedback you get too. So you have to pick up it's really bad. It's like, honestly, it shouldn't be that way.
Are people scared of you?
It's not about that. Yes, like you get less feedback maybe directly from your team, though, as a leader, it's your job to try to solicit it and get to it. But it's really about like, if you report to the CEO, there are very few CEOs I know who like really get super excited about giving their direct reports feedback. They're like, I manage executives. I expect you to be pretty independent. Go do your thing. Unless you're doing something like terribly wrong, I'm not going to go tell you, hey, you should be doing this thing like slightly different. Mm-hmm. That's just not how most CEOs are wired. So you just get less of that of that feedback, it's not just because people are scared. It's just like, I would say like the manager hygiene is not not really that, as valued at super senior levels, even though I think it should be.
Yeah, and how do you handle that? Like, if you ever get negative feedback, about yourself or your product, like, how do you handle that? How do you incorporate it?
Well, first I try not to react, even if I want to react, even if it's like in the heat of the moment or someone doesn't give the feedback in a particularly well thought out way, just not react. Try to internalize what they're saying, and then like the best approach I think is always like ask a question. Because if you ask a question, it shows that you're truly curious about what is going on, and they'll give you more information. And usually, like, if they give you a one-sentence feedback, like, oh, this product sucks. Well, okay, that's not useful. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. You have to ask why. You have to ask, like, what, and ask more and more follow-up questions. And whether it's about your product or about how you show up, it's the same thing. It's like most of the time, the one-line thing isn't really it, or even what they're actually saying the feedback isn't going to tell you what you need to actually change. You have to dig in more and understand they may say something, but like actually what you need to do is something different. And that's true at a team level too. It's like people will say, like for instance, like one of the things that we got a lot of feedback on in our last employee survey, and it's actually been a theme, is like work-life balance. Like work-life balance isn't great. Well, what does that mean? Like when I see that, I'm like, okay, this is a real problem, but I can't just go be like, okay, work less hours. Like that, no one's going to be able to like really internalize that, or, make sure that, I could say these things and it helps, but not significantly. Make sure we have a lot of team members in India, so people end up staying up late on both sides because of the time difference. And so I'm like, okay, work like only 2 evenings a week. Don't work 4 evenings a week. Things like that I can say, but like instead, like what we decided to do is like we did a survey. So we asked a ton of questions about how people were spending their time on the team, what they felt like they were spending too much time on, what they felt like they were not spending enough time on, and just asked lots of different questions in many different ways so that we could gather more feedback about like really what are some of the things that we could do that would help people feel like they have more time or that they could get more stuff done in the day. Because usually like work-life balancing is not actually about how many hours people are working. Sometimes it is, but it's about like, are the hours that I'm spending actually moving the needle and creating the impact that I want? Or do I feel like I'm filling my time with a bunch of like busy work that doesn't actually help? And so we were trying to get at like what is actually going on in the organization. And it became very clear. It was great to do the survey. It was like, 75% of people feel like they spend too much time on internal meetings. Okay, let's go solve that problem then. And there was a lot of other feedback that came in there of like what we could start doing, stop doing. And that was like the level of curiosity we needed. And that's ultimately what's going to make the team feel like, hey, you're hearing me, you're doing something about it, my feedback matters. And that's what's going to encourage them to continue to give feedback so we can continue to make the team better.
I wish the CS department would run some of those feedback so I could be like, stop giving me more P-sets. Like, I really need them to do that. You should email some of the professors with that.
I don't know if like academia totally operates in that way.
Like the word balance is just thrown out of the dictionary during midterm season. And then one of the other things that I was really struck by is you like described this moment when I think you became president of LiveRamp and you spent time again getting feedback from people and then like projecting all of that on the screen and like asking them like, all right, I hear your problems, here's what I'm going to do about that. And I find that really interesting because I think you made yourself really vulnerable, but also I feel like that vulnerability can be hard. So how do you do that as the leader? How do you build that vulnerability, that trust with the people that you're working with?
Well, I always like think about like what's the worst that's going to happen if I show people this, and I still do it. It's like anytime I have a 360 review, now it's like, again, as you get more senior, it's harder to get it directly from your boss might not do it, but like I have an executive coach, for instance, and so I'll just have her do a 360 review for me. I'll share that out with my team, the full notes of it, and like this is what people said, this is like what and then I'll share what I'm doing about it. I think like, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm like, I've always kind of operated that way. I'm an open book. I think about like, what's the worst that's really going to happen? I'm willing to try different things. So I'm like very much a big experimenter. Someone's like, hey, why don't we try this? I'm like, sure, let's try it. So I'm sure at some point one of my executive coaches that I worked with was like, why don't you share your feedback? And I was like, okay, sounds good. I'll share it and like see what happens. And then when you try these things, like some things work and some things don't, but this one worked. And so I just continue to do it because people really, really appreciate it. And it gives me a chance to basically be like, here are the things that I'm going to change. And there's no real downside to it. People don't usually respond to vulnerability by like coming at you with stuff. So
unless they're my brother.
Well, that's a different, family's a little bit different.
Not my brother. He does not operate that way. So I'd love to open it up to people for questions, but before we do that, I'd love to also just like touch on some practical advice.
Sure.
So all of us here are really interested in product management, possibly as a career. I'm curious, do you have any advice for us or things that you think we should try?
I think the reality is like, I know there's probably a mix of people in undergrad and grad school. If you don't have experience in product management, experience working, but certainly experience in product management, the unfortunate truth is it's hard to get product management jobs. And I think like, I guess like if that is something you're experiencing, obviously like go like search out for the APM programs at various companies that have it. Reach out to people like me, and maybe there's like internships and stuff that we know about. But I would also say just like find a good company and enter it in some role. And figure out a way to like get into product. That's what I ended up doing. Like when I graduated from Stanford, I went into software engineering. And then I moved into product management. And there's, someone on my team that we just hired out of the customer support organization. I've hired people out of product marketing. I've hired people out of like tons of different jobs into product management. And so it may be difficult to get a role in product management. You should certainly try. But if you can find anything that's like in a role that's adjacent to product management, which is essentially any role, as I told you, is like you kind of end up working with product and then you start taking initiative to like build the relationships with product managers, to like learn about that area, to contribute in different ways, like maybe as like a side project in that area, you can find a way into it. But it unfortunately takes a little bit of hustle right now to get into product management because most companies don't really have enough quantity of product managers to like set up training programs where they're willing to kind of train people right out of school.
What are some of the skills that you think are the most important for PMs? I think
there's a lot. Well, I mean, I think it's like in general, like I look for people that have a lot of curiosity because as you heard me talk about, I think that's how you end up figuring out how to build great products. But like beyond, I mean, that's like a trait or that's something that you can exhibit. I think like really the ability to synthesize disparate types of signals and information and come up with a point of view. I think a lot of the mechanics of product management, like how to work with engineering, how to do all this stuff, are pretty easy to figure out on the job. But the hard thing is like, how do you develop a strong point of view on something even when you don't have all the data? And that point of view has to be strong, but it also has to be flexible enough to take in new information and update your thinking and update your decision-making model based on that. And that's a hard skill. And like, that's what I see a lot in product, like the difference between good and great product managers is there's a lot of good product managers who can come in, learn a product, figure out, tactically prioritize this over that. Where sometimes people struggle in like getting promoted and getting to the next level is that they just cannot synthesize a strong point of view. And that can be like a real blocker in truly being able to go forward in your product career.
Super cool. Awesome. Well, I saw a lot of cool questions on the Google form. I was trying to pull them up right now, so feel free to ask Ms. Gupta whatever.
Yeah.
You work very low in the stack, I'm assuming. So how does product management at that level look like compared to most product managers who know about B2C or application layer stuff?
So we have a whole mix because we have people that look more like a PM that you would see at any kind of B2B SaaS company. Because they're working on like the user experience of our platform or other things like that are kind of higher on the stack, all the way to like I have 2 hardware PMs that work on my team who work on like qualifying software that we have that's part of like our larger solution on various kinds of hardware. Super, super different. So like that's, and then everything in between. So there are, you know, if you are working lower in the stack, there are more specialized roles that are far more technical. And like there's still this like whole strategy element to it, but it also requires a technical skill set that's very, very different. Whereas like if you're working on like the user experience and stuff that's really more at the application layer, your work is a lot more about, again, the experience of the customer. And you still have to like, you have to understand a lot more about like the broader use cases and less about like, hey, this is the technicalities of this person's environment and, you know, making trade-off decisions based on, you know, what kinds of environments are more common than others. So it's like it can be quite different. On my team, I actually have just quite like a huge range of PMs, and that's actually what makes it really interesting and fun, is because we do have people with such different skill sets and backgrounds on the team, and like bringing all these people together to like deliver this very complex product to our customers means that we need to have that kind of variety. But I think like the good thing, like if there's one thing to take away from that is like, there are different types of PMs that spike in different skill sets. And there are PM roles out there for lots of different kinds of skill sets. When you're looking for a job, don't try to shoehorn with the area that you spike at into something that isn't really the right fit. It's like there are companies that like only want to hire people that have a certain kind, like have an engineering background because their product is so technical and requires that. There are companies that are like, hey, for this role, I really need someone that is more like a little bit more like a product marketing person, but with the product hat on, because this is really about how we position this product effectively in the market. We have great technology, but it's really about how do we position against our competition and what are the tweaks that we make to really get adoption. So there's just quite a spectrum of different kinds of product management roles. And if you know what you're really good at and what the value you're going to bring and match that to the type of role, then you're far more likely to, you know, have success in getting hired for that role.
Awesome. What else? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. It's very insightful. I have 2 questions. The first one, you just mentioned there are so many trade-offs to make on day-to-day works. I'm wondering the trade-off between, for example, sometimes the customer, what they need is very far from your product roadmap. It's different from the long-term goal of the whole company.
Yeah.
How you make that trade-off. And second trade-off, as the only young executive in the team, like how you made a trade-off between board's ask and also the customer's need. And my second question is more about like I know there's a huge difference between software product and hardware product. Like I'm very like excited for your new project is on how AI can unlock the tremendous power of the data. I'm wondering like when you develop those new products, will you ask the potential customer to pay to put some money first? Because I see a lot of hardware companies before the product, they already have some order come in, but I'm not sure how about for SaaS companies.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so your first question was about like really how to make the trade-off decisions when you have like, especially when you have a customer that wants something that's so far out from your roadmap. So the one thing is that I'm a big believer in like you've got to leverage your customers to take you in the direction that you want to go as a business. However, you can't be so stuck on where you want to go that you don't take what the customers say and take that into account when you're thinking about, does this fit in for the long term? We get crazy requests all the time of like, hey, if you build support for backing up this random database, then we'll buy your product. But if you don't do this, we're not going to buy it. Okay, it takes us like 8 months to build 8 months and 10 engineers to build like a full-fledged solution for a totally new type of workload. We're not going to drop everything to go do that for one customer. So we have to like go and say, look, for these kinds of, if this is the situation, we are going to qualify you out of the sales cycle. So we're not even consider you for this. Like it's not even going to come. So there's stuff like that where it's like very black and white. Now there's a lot of stuff that isn't black and white where it's like, hey, we have a big customer. For 95% of what they want to do, we are like a great solution for them. And then they have this 5% of things that they want that we just don't support today. Now, I think like the good thing is that again, and I think this is a good thing about B2B enterprise, is that like you can have an intelligent conversation with a customer and try to help them understand, or try to understand from them how critical is this, and also have a roadmap conversation. So I have a lot of roadmap conversations. I'm like, this is what our plans are. You're asking for this. We actually already know that this is that you need and other customers need, but it's going to come in 6 months. Is that something you can live with? And it's like, sometimes the answer is like, yeah, okay. And actually, a lot of the times the answer is like, yeah, that's totally fine. It's going to take us like 6 months to implement all this other stuff anyway. And in some cases, it's like, no, it's a deal breaker. And then we have to decide as a business, how big is this account? How important is it that we win this deal, that we shift things to try to bring the date up further? And there's only so much you can do. You can't like snap your fingers and have it tomorrow. So, and again, customers typically will understand that. They still may choose someone else, but like you can go have an intelligent conversation with them. So sometimes we have chosen to like, hey, we're going to bring this in sooner. It was already something we were going to do. Sometimes there's stuff where we said, look, you know what, this customer's asking for it. It's a small thing, even though it's not in the grand scheme of things exactly what we want to do. It's not 10 engineers for 8 months. It's 1 engineer for 3 weeks. Let's just go do it to win this deal. It's not black and white, but like that's how these conversations often go. And I do, like, for the big things, I do spend a lot of time with the customer trying to help them and help our sales team understand how to position what we can do today and where we're going, so that the customer feels comfortable that they're entering into a partnership where we're going to listen to them and that we're going to adapt to what they're looking for, but without moving mountains in such a way that we end up creating a product that isn't sustainable. Because that's the trade-off that you make. If you make too many of those decisions to go build something custom for a customer, then you essentially don't have a product. You have a bunch of custom solutions, and that's very difficult to maintain. It usually means stability issues. It means a lot of different things. It means the speed of innovation slows way down. Even though you sped it up for a little bit, it's going to slow down because you have 16 different versions of your product. So those are real decisions and trade-offs, and like sometimes it is the right decision to go build the thing for the customer or accelerate it, and sometimes it's not. So that's a little bit about how it goes, but it is challenging, and there was a lot of heated debate, especially when it's a really large customer, really large deal, and it takes a lot of collaboration to make the right decision, but more importantly, bring everyone in the organization along with that decision. And then your second question was about, what was it?
Also the trade-off between the ask from board and also the need from customer, because sometimes there's a conflict as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as much of an issue if the CEO has a good relationship with the board. And then I try to align also just like what we're doing with how the CEO is thinking about things too. I think in some cases there's that big difference, but for us, it's like we're driving the strategy. So like as an executive team of the company, we own the strategy. The board doesn't own the strategy. So, and our strategy is informed both by where we think where customers are today and what they're asking for and what we think that they're going to want tomorrow, and how can we continue to create multiple different growth drivers for the business. A lot of strategy is around like, I heard someone say this once, that it's like if you have a good strategy, the strategy is obvious. So and I really, really believe that. It's like if you have a good strategy, you articulate it well, the conclusions, you've laid out an argument or laid out a thesis such that the conclusion that you come to is something that everyone is like, yeah, that makes sense. And if you can do that, then you don't really have a lot of these conflicts because it just makes sense. And the decision-making process makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah.
So my parents also immigrated from India, started their own business, and I feel like the definition of success for them is oftentimes very much tied to having your own business. And so I was wondering why you decided to go into industry and how you kind of redefine the definition of success, if that was something that you felt in your household.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly had my parents ask me for like the first 5 years of my career at least, like, are you going to start a company? And even still, like, they'll ask that sometimes.
That's one of the questions we got in the thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were like, do you have any plans to start your own company in the
I
future?
don't.
That was your parents, actually.
Yeah, exactly. No, I loved working at a startup, like a small startup. When I joined LiveRamp, it was 20 people. So it really was like a small startup. We didn't have product market fit. And I loved building the company from there. But what I found is that and what I found at LiveRamp as it was got bigger and bigger, I was more interested. I found myself more and more intellectually interested in the problems. And when I decided to leave LiveRamp and started looking at what was I going to do next, I considered everything. I considered investing. I considered starting a company. I considered B2C, B2B, everything under the sun. I took every conversation for probably 6 or 9 months and just learned what was out there and what I was going to be interested in. But for me, I think while starting a company is super intellectually interesting because you're building a new product and you're trying to find product market fit, the complexity of it's not that complicated. It's it's hard, but it's not complicated. And because you're not making a lot of trade-off decisions, you are just moving in a direction and seeing if that direction is right. And if it's not, you move in a different direction. And I like complexity. And so for me, doing things that were at scale, that were complex, that was what's going to keep me interested. And so I don't have this interest to go back to something super small because the complexity is low. And I think what I really excel at, what gets me excited is where complexity is very high. Redefining that, I think it's at the end of the day, I think when you're earlier in your career, success is defined a lot by what other people think. And as you get further along, at least you have the opportunity to build the confidence. Not everyone does that. You can see that in the way people behave, but you have the opportunity to kind of build the confidence, and you have more validation that hey, what you're doing, you're doing something impactful. And that shows up in many different ways in terms of, people coming to you for advice, or you get paid more, you get promotions, there's things like that are you see that you can see that progress. And I think at this point it's I know that I know what I'm good at, I know what I love doing, and I know that I can have a really successful career in that. So for me, it's I definitely don't tie my success to one day starting or owning a business, because I don't think that's what I want to do.
Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned that now, the advent of Gen AI, you're kind of have a focus on that more. So how do you keep up with new technologies as a PM, now as a CPO?
Yeah.
Even when you were in early stages of your PM career, learning and upskilling and knowing what's out there so that you can bring in more ideas.
I don't think I don't think I necessarily do an amazing job of this, just to be clear. But the way I learn, like I said at the beginning, is by talking to people. So going to events and hearing different people speak, and talking to people VCs that are seeing a lot of different companies, talking to people on my engineering team who are exploring new technologies in their end. There's so many people. When you're in a company, you're surrounded by so many different types of people that there's a lot of people to learn from. And if you want to get more deeper on something, there's also, you can ask them, hey, do you know anyone that knows this area really well? Could you introduce me to them? And you can learn that way. And so that's kind of what I've done. Obviously, where there's stuff that's really directly relevant to our business, we're we're trying to figure out how to solve this kind of problem. We'll I'll go out and actively try to meet people or companies that are solving that. And we've done a lot of in my previous company, we did a lot of acquisitions. We've done one big acquisition since I joined Rubrik. And that process is also really great because you get to learn more about technology. But it's mostly just about kind of following my curiosity, figuring out what I need for my job, and then just being really open to meeting people and talking to people and letting that conversation take me where it will. But I wouldn't say I have done a particularly great job, though, at keeping up to date on this stuff. Even on the AI stuff right now, I rely a lot. I did a lot of initial research probably in April and May of last year. And now at this point, it's the types of things that we're dealing with are so technical that I mainly rely on engineering to kind of help me understand what the latest developments are and what are the challenges.
So even in early career, that would be your advice is, try to seek out people.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's just tons of stuff, and there's tons of resources on the internet. There's tons of YouTube videos you could watch. So it's not just doing that, but it's whatever the best way for you to learn. Different people learn in different ways. My husband's mechanical engineer, we met at Stanford. He loves reading papers. I'm never going to learn by reading a paper. That's just not going to happen. So and he listens to podcasts at 2x speed. I also will not retain any of that information if I do that. So different people learn in different ways. And for me, learning is a social experience, like that's how I learn, and that's what I lean on. But I would definitely encourage you to figure out like what are the ways that you learn and lean on those.
I feel like if you went to college now, like 2x speed would be your mantra. Like
Probably, I do remember having lectures. Yeah, but lectures tend to be quite slow. So yeah, that's probably good.
Yeah, go for it.
I want to go back to the advice on developing a strong sense. When you want to move forward, you have to provide an opinion based on what you have available in environments of uncertainty. How do you do that? I mean, this is an ambiguous question. But
yeah, it's really hard. I think getting a variety of points of view, because I think sometimes there's this thing of like, oh, you have to have a strong perspective that you come up with on your own. That's not the case. Like you need to come up with a strong perspective based on what you're hearing from other people. I think where people go wrong in this is either they don't really talk to enough people, so their perspective is not one that like, and someone can come in and poke a lot of holes in it because it's like you only talk to engineering, but you didn't talk to any customers. You didn't talk to marketing. You didn't talk to anyone else. So that's one area. The other thing that I see is like, yeah, you talk to a lot of people, but then you're like waffling between A or B, and you're like not really presenting a perspective. You're like, oh, this could be good or this could be good, and like you're not actually coming with a recommendation. And I think that comes from not understanding like whose voice is actually the most important, or what is the most important driver to make this decision or have this perspective. So in some cases, the biggest driver may be, hey, we need to sign 5 big new customers on this product. So that like should be your anchor in coming up with their point of view. And if there's ever a contention of like, should you do A or B? Well, then the deciding factor should be which one of these is actually going to help us sign the big new customer. And if it's kind of a wash, then be like, okay, we'll do first this thing and then this thing. It's like a sequencing issue. That might be your decision-making criteria. Another thing, a different decision-making criteria might be like, hey, our biggest goal for this is like, we just need to get a product out to market that is good enough very quickly, because maybe it's super competitive market, whatever the reason may be, like that's the thing. Well, then maybe you're going to make a different decision, because you're going to say, well, we could do these 2 different features. This one might be slightly better, but it's going to take 2x the engineering time. So we don't have that time. So let's go do this thing instead, get something out the door, and then we can start building this other thing that takes 2x amount of time once something is out the door, because it's super important that we get this out there. So if you know what you're trying to optimize for, then creating the point of view becomes a lot more straightforward once you have all the voices. But a lot of people like kind of lack that framework in their mind and don't ask those questions. And then they're just then you're swimming in a sea of voices and you're like, it's arbitrary which one you're choosing. And if you don't have a framework, then you can't even explain why you're choosing this thing versus something else.
So you have, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a follow-up.
Yeah.
You kind of design this robust opinion based on the diversity of opinions around you. Did you build that in your organization? You hire that diversity, or you develop the networks outside to get that diverse point?
Hiring is a very slow process, right? It's like, yes, I hire for diversity on my team. So when I joined Rubrik, everyone on the product team essentially came from like VMware and Nutanix. That was not a very diverse team. And so I started, like when roles opened, I started hiring, and now my team, like 3 years later, is very diverse. But that is a very slow process, because like you're not gonna fire your whole team and rehire them. You're gonna, things are gonna happen. So you have to find the diverse voices wherever you can get them. And that may be within your organization, that may be outside of your organization. I actually find the recruiting process is actually a great way to understand, because you can ask people. You're meeting tons of candidates. Usually I'm interviewing people that have some experience in something, and so it's like I can ask their perspective on things and like learn something from that. And that's another way to get diverse voices. And so I think it's not hard to find people to talk to. Like at least I don't find it hard to find people to talk to, because there are, like, again, if you're in 100 or even like we're in a 3,000 person organization, there's lots of people. Like it's just a matter of like slacking them and being like, hey, you want to chat? Like, and asking them and be like, hey, do you know anyone that knows this thing? Or like, knows a customer that wants to talk about this? And usually it's like, it takes effort, but if you hustle, like you can definitely find people to talk to and find those voices. Yeah.
Along the lines of recruiting, I think you mentioned trying to find a product person that has their own opinions or so on, but with, like, say, computer science or so on, the interview process is very straightforward. You know, you're developing, solve 3 problems
Right.
and whatnot. So for product or PM interviews, or generally, how do you evaluate if someone's a good PM, or like what might be things that stand out, or on the other side, how do you know if you did well, or like?
It's really hard. So I think like interviewing is hard. It's hard because not everyone is a good interviewer. So you might be in an interview, may go badly, not because you did anything wrong, but because the interviewer is like just not a good interviewer. And also it's like it's not as black and white, especially non-technical roles, what success looks like. Now, if you go to like a big company like Facebook or Google or someone like that, they have very structured interviewing. So if you like look it up online, you know exactly like what the process is, like what they look for, et cetera. You can usually have a good sense if you did well or not. But that's not how most PM hiring is. And I think a lot of it, I like personally, like when I'm interviewing people, I ask a lot about their previous experiences. And there's not always in product management. They may be in something else, but just like how they approach projects, how they approach problems. Cause like I'm trying to really understand how are they going to come in and approach solving a problem. What is the like way that they're going to interact with other people, bring in these opinions? How are they going to overcome obstacles along the way? All of that. Like that tends to be like what I look for. So there are interviews that are like that. There are interviews that are more like case studies, right? Where people are like, hey, I'm going to give you some problem and you're going to work with me on the spot to like work through like how you would think about this problem. And usually then they're like wondering like, okay, what are the questions you're going to ask to get more information? How are you structuring your thinking around how you would solve this? How would you structure like thinking about success metrics? And they're like looking more at like kind of the technical aspect of how you would approach a problem. I don't love those because I feel like it's like when you're asking something that's theoretical, it's kind of hard to get high signal from that. But some people really like that, and that I respect that too. So it's, you know, it can be, those are the like different types of like interviews that you could have. I mean, you might be interviewing with engineering. They might ask more about like your collaboration with engineering. They may want to understand like your technical skill because some roles are like much more technical. So they will kind of ask you more about not like writing code, but how do you approach like developing an API? And like, how would you think about developing an API for this kind of situation? They want to see your systems thinking around that. So those are a few different examples. I would say a lot of PM stuff though is like more experiential, like asking about different experiences you've had and like trying to test for specific behaviors.
Awesome. Any last questions?
Sorry, I want to go back to the new project you are working on. I'm wondering how you assess the market demands before the product launch, and will you ask a potential customer to put the check first?
Oh, the check first, right? You had to ask me that before.
Thank you.
For us, like, so first of all, like while we have a hardware piece of what we do, because we have to deploy our software onto hardware, we are not a hardware business. So we do not sell any hardware. When companies have to sell hardware, they actually have to develop. There's a lot of upfront capital money they have to put against the development to actually like launch some kind of hardware. So people will often ask for orders up front. For our business, we're not doing that. For this AI product, we're actually going to existing customers. We're telling them we're specifically not going to charge you for this. We actually just want you to use the product and give us feedback on it, and you'll get it for free, and we'll charge someone else for it in the future. And that's because like for us, like if we want to take away as many barriers to entry as possible to get adoption. Now, the biggest barrier to entry is not, again, the money in this case. It's actually them putting their time into using our product and like trying to fit it into their own workflows of how they're using AI. So if we can get them to agree to that, like the money is inconsequential because we're really trying to get the product to a state where it's sellable to everyone else. And so that's a place where we're definitely not going to charge, and it doesn't make sense because we don't really need to charge for it. And it's really about getting our product to a place where we can truly roll this out to a lot of people and charge hopefully a lot for it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking today.
Thanks for having me.
I absolutely loved all the things you said about especially feedback, pivoting. I think those are great things to take away. And yeah, for everyone else, we have a lot of opportunities to get involved with the club. So would love for you to be part of that. And then also we have a couple more workshops coming up this quarter with the CPO of Masterclass, Instacart, and Roblox. So would love to see you there as well. But thank you so much.
Thanks.